Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. All right, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. My name is Sean, and I am joined, as always, by Kyle.
That's me.
We're happy to have listeners like you, so thanks for tuning in today. If you haven't yet, don't miss an episode by subscribing. Go to iTunes, Stitcher, whatever program you like to use, and be sure to subscribe to this episode so you never miss an episode.
Then it just shows up right on your phone like magic, man.
Yeah. And you just hit play and you're up to date on what's going on.
You can be a magician just by pressing a button. So, there we are.
I don't really think that would make somebody a magician.
Well, the definition of a magician, is it just somebody who does magic? Is that what it is? Because they could be that for a moment anyway.
But okay. I mean, do you really call push and play magic? I mean, I don't know that it isn't. I'm just saying. Seems a little weird.
So, Sean, what are we talking about today?
Well, overall, we're going to get into the idea of maybe living life on purpose and being intentional about what you're doing. And the key word that comes to mind for both of us is the place for excuses versus reasons. Both exist in the world and both have a place, but we're going to talk about excuses versus reasons, I think, today.
Nice.
Overall.
All right. So before we get into that, I think everyone can kind of start thinking about that idea, and while you're mulling over that in your head, I am going to tell a story. So as I told in a couple episodes ago, I started driving for Uber. And at that point, I had done 2 drives. Now I've done 4. I did 2 more last week. And one of them, I got the alert, and it said, this is a long drive. It's longer or something like that, over 45 minutes. So it didn't tell me where it was going. It just said this will be a 45-minute plus drive. So I go and pick the guy up, and I pick him up at his house, and it turns out he's going into downtown Philadelphia, like the heart of the city. I'm like, all right, let's do it. So it says it's going to take an hour to get there. So it was a nice drive, though. A lot of it was on back roads, so we weren't sitting in traffic a lot. And the guy ended up being super cool, and we started talking, and I was like, I don't know. I think I kind of wanted to breach the subject. I think he kind of did too, but he didn't want to offend me. Anyway, I said, something like, as you can see, I'm driving with my hands, and that's my wheelchair right there sitting next to me. And so then he entertained my entire story of how I was diagnosed, like how it affects me day to day. And he was really complimentary about like, oh, that's so rad that you're driving and doing all this stuff. And so he was super cool. And I finally got to have the conversation about, why I'm driving with my hands. And he didn't ask me to, like, stop the car and get out or anything. So that was nice. And that drive, I made $62 on it. And then he gave, like, the next day, I noticed he gave me a $20 tip.
Nice.
So
that's huge.
Yeah, it was awesome. So anyway, I am an official Uber driver now, and I've made one big drive so far. So my other ones were pretty, they were like 20 minutes or less, but that one was significant. So, yeah.
So $60 plus a $20 tip. That's a lot of $9 phone holders if you keep breaking them.
Actually, it broke again.
No way.
So I think
maybe it's time to upgrade to like a $20.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I think I'm gonna get a different type and maybe spend a couple more dollars on it this time. I have the money to do it.
That's a good idea. That's cool though. I didn't know that the Uber app for the driver maybe gave him a warning that it was a longer ride than normal. Because, when I get an Uber, and I usually ask the driver, oh, how's it going today? How long have you been driving? Blah, blah, blah. And every now and then you'll get a guy or a driver that says, oh, yeah, I had a 2-hour drive this morning or ride.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, for people that do Uber on the side, how in the world do you manage that? Like, all of a sudden you get hailed for a ride and that guy's like, oh, I want to go to LA, which is 5 hours away. Like,
yeah, so Uber has this thing. So, all right, I ended up in downtown Philadelphia, and it was like an hour away from where I live. So Uber has a thing where you can filter the rides. You can choose your destination. So I would say, take me home, and I would type that in, my address, and it chooses the riders based on where you want to go. However, if you use that, they keep another 30%. So,
oh, wow.
So that seems kind of like they're taking a lot, but it's either that or nothing, right? Like,
sure.
That's what I did. I drove home and I didn't do a trip, but if they would have taken 30%, it would have been, $40 instead of $0. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I have heard that you can kind of tell what direction you want to go in, and they'll choose rides based on your ultimate destination to help you kind of get closer. Exactly. I didn't know that it would cost the driver more profit or, a larger share.
Yeah, dude, because I spoke at a pharma company last week, and it was they sent a Lyft for me. It was Lyft, not Uber, but it was a 2-hour drive. It was all the way in New Jersey, so it was like that driver is now 2 hours away from where they usually drive. Sure. What? But yeah,
that's crazy. That's cool. I'm glad you're still doing it and making a little bit of money.
Yeah. So, Sean, let's start with the definition of excuse versus reason, because they're similar, but they are absolutely different. So, what do you think?
And like I said, I think both are legit depending on the background. So,
right.
I went to a Webster's and I looked up just basic definitions of each, and for the sake of our conversation, for the word excuse, we're going to use the definition to serve as an apology or justification. And I think I'll lean on justification more than anything. So to serve as a justification.
Right. Okay. And then, that makes sense.
Reason is a basis or a cause as for some belief, action, fact, or event. So the basis for why that was done, or why you're doing this, that, and the other, or why you said that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or a statement presented in justification. So both use the word justify. An excuse would be a justification for not doing something, and the reason would be justification for maybe doing something.
Man, so they're really they're really close.
They're very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But
go ahead.
I think the tie-in just maybe a really easy way to kind of look at them. For going back to your Uber scenario, you, I assume, have a reason or two for doing Uber. We've mentioned in the past you're going to make a little bit of extra money on the side, but also it's helping you get a little better content for the podcast and meet new people and spread your story. So there are a handful of reasons why you're doing it. Right? Well, for me, I'm not doing it, and I'm not going to. Some would say, Sean, oh, you're making excuses like I don't have time, or I don't want the $60. Oh, Uber keeps 30%. That's way too much, and there are maybe a bunch of reasons or excuses, depending on how you look at it, that I am not going to become an Uber driver. For me, I have a reason why I'm not driving for Uber, and that is I lease my current vehicle. And if you lease a vehicle, you're limited on your mileage.
Oh, I see. On the lease, so, yeah.
Correct. And of course, I can drive whatever I want, and I can exceed my mileage, but I'm going to pay for that at the end of my lease. So for me, I don't use the quote-unquote excuse that I'm too tired, or I don't want the extra money, or I don't have time. I have a strong reason why I don't do it, and that is I don't want to exceed my allotted mileage on my car.
That's a good example, because how do you determine, all right, what if you said, oh, I don't have enough time? Like, what determines whether that's an excuse or a reason?
That's a really good point. And a hard one to answer. For me personally, I would have to look at my calendar, my day-to-day activities, and determine, do I not have time because I'm doing other things that are more important? Or do I not have time because I just don't want to use my free time in that manner?
Right.
And an excuse could be, or a reason could exist either way.
Yeah.
Like if all I'm doing is, I don't want to be frivolous, but in my head, I'm thinking, okay, video games is, to me, a waste of time. For others, it's a career. People play video games on YouTube and make money. Okay, so I'm not discrediting it, but in my world, in my life, that's a waste of time. So if all I'm doing is playing video games for the sake of wasting my time, then I would clarify that as an excuse.
Yep.
I don't want to drive because video games are more important to me.
Yeah, no, I think that, like we said, they're very similar definitions, but it just depends on how you apply them, right? And you apply both of those definitions based on your personal disposition and principles, right? So each person is going to apply a reason and excuse differently.
Mm-hmm. So, I think that goes back to the definition of reason. It's to justify a belief or an action. So, I believe driving for Uber is going to penalize me in the long run because of my car. You believe Uber is going to help you make a little extra money and get some content for conversation. Whether it's on the podcast or your next book or whatever it may be.
You're right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think where humans, we have to be careful is understanding the basis of your excuse or reason.
Right.
And I'm no philosopher, so I'm not expecting to blow any minds. I'm expecting to confuse some people. So I'm expecting an email by text from somebody out there.
Well, also, Sean, you say you're no philosopher, but I will mention that this conversation started because you posted the blog on friedrichsataxianews.com about this exact subject.
Mm-hmm.
And you're starting a column there that's going to talk about issues sort of that stem from this concept. Is that right?
100%. Thanks for bringing that up. So, yeah, it's a column that lives on Friedrich's Ataxia News. So I would love it if y'all subscribed and read it regularly. It'll be a recurring thing. So anyway, the column title is No Good Excuse, which I think is immensely different than just this mantra of no excuses.
Mm.
You know, a lot of people have this, go get 'em attitude, always going to the gym, kind of macho mentality of no excuses, get it done. And I think that's fair, but ultimately there's always going to be excuses. But it really depends on where that excuse stems from. Is it a good excuse or is it a bad excuse? And in my personal theory, there is no good excuse.
But there are good reasons, though, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what might be a good reason for you is a poor excuse for me, or vice versa.
Right. So, Sean, let's talk about some real-world examples. I want to talk about Race Across America.
Mm-hmm.
You and I both did Race Across America in 2010 on the same team, and it is known as the world's toughest bike race. And it goes from San Diego, Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland. You have to finish in less than 9 days. You and I have an energy deprivation disease. Mm-hmm. There are so many reasons, right? Why we shouldn't do the race. Mm-hmm. And I think we turned those reasons into excuses and chose to not follow those excuses, right? And sure. Because I feel like a reason, if we saw those things as reasons, like for example, you have an energy deprivation disease that limits your mobility, that should probably be a reason to not do the world's toughest bike race. Mm-hmm. However, I feel like we saw that as an excuse, and we're like, all right, there's no good excuse. Let's not heed that. You know, is that sure. Kind of?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. Of course, you know, in all of it, you want to be smart and you want to be safe. So obviously, you don't want to jeopardize life or limb. But I think that's the perfect example of really thinking about what's an excuse and what's a reason.
Yeah,
we have a lot of excuses, or we had a lot of excuses not to do it. All four of us were employed when we did this. So an excuse might be we don't have time off work. But that could also be a reason. The only way you're going to know whether it's an excuse or a reason is to dig a little deeper. So, for instance, in my case, I had just started a fairly new job. So in my head, one reason to not do RAM was I didn't want to jeopardize my new job, or I thought I couldn't get time off. Okay, well, when I went to my boss and I explained what was going on and what the opportunity was, he graciously gave me all the time off I needed to not only do the race, but to train. So in that moment, he turned my reason for not doing it into an excuse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well...
What was the reason in the beginning of the day was I can't get the time off work, but since I was granted time off work, to blame my lack of time off work would be an excuse.
Yep. No, and I think maybe the difference can be made in the purpose of it, right? Like if you said I want 2 weeks off to go sit on the beach, in Southern California, the answer would have been way different than I want 2 weeks off to ride my bike across the country for a cause that I really care about and it might save my life and the lives of so many people. And, I think that's probably a super compelling thing that has the power to turn a reason into an excuse.
I would agree, or at the very least, it plays a part in the I've lost my train of thought.
And we may have just lost some listeners there.
Yeah. Well, for my supervisor or my boss to know the reason was helpful, but I don't think the reason for what I was doing should have caused me to not approach my boss. Does that make sense? Like in your example, sitting on the side of the ocean or on the side of the beach for 2 weeks, for me is frivolous. For you is frivolous. But maybe somebody that has a mental health disorder or needs an emotional rest and needs the 2 weeks just sitting in front of the ocean, that 2 weeks could have been just as powerful for him or her as it was for me riding my bike across the country.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Like it's a factor in the situation, but it's not the absolute difference maker. Like, you gotta take it into account with everything else in the situation.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about just helped my boss make a decision based on my information. It didn't lead to more excuses or more reasons either way.
Right. All right.
Does that sort of
yeah.
But if we go back to, I said don't jeopardize life or limb. For somebody that maybe is blind and their entire team is blind and their entire support team is blind, okay, that would be a good reason to not do RAM. If nobody on the team can see, okay, that's a good reason to not do it. Now,
man, to me, I think that's a good reason to do it too, if you can figure out how.
Of course. Well, exactly. We know that some teams or some riders are blind that have competed in RAM. Well, they have the help of people that can see. So there's a difference there. It's an entire team that's blind versus a team that has blind people on it.
Okay.
So
yeah,
if my entire team is blind, okay, that's a good reason to not do it because that's dangerous. But if I can find 2 or 3 people to help lead the blind, okay, now I have a reason to figure it out and accomplish something really incredible.
I agree. Yeah.
But I also think, keeping RAM in the picture, if we were to consider somebody, and I don't follow professional cycling nowadays, but whether it's Hincapie or Lance Armstrong, these guys are professional cyclists on the level of you can't get any better, right? Than Tour de France type cyclists. Okay, well, for them, RAM might be a waste of time for them. So their reason for not doing it is that's little leagues, even though it's maybe the toughest cycling event, they don't do it because they have other things to train and other ways of getting ready for competition. So for them, not doing it is a valid reason. Whereas for other people, it would just be an excuse. Oh, I don't have time. I can't get off work. I can't afford it. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, I mean, I think the point is that you just apply it to each situation individually, and you gotta, there's no hard and fast rule. You just gotta figure out. You have to. I think it's important to understand the two concepts, excuse and reason, and then just to apply it to each situation separately. Sean, how does this concept apply in your everyday life? Like,
I think it's a valid question. I think ultimately the question could be, what does this concept have to do with this podcast?
There you go.
And
that's a good one, too.
I think in our everyday life, this is true for you, me, and many of our listeners. The challenge is finding ways to live beyond our circumstances. And if I'm not careful, I could be ruled, my life could be ruled by excuses as opposed to reasons. So this applies to me personally in the sense that, like you said, energy deprivating, I wake up tired every day. Like,
Right.
It's very weird that I wake up ready to just take on a new day. If I'm not careful, that could easily turn into an excuse or a reason to stay in bed. But my belief of being productive and the need to be a productive contributor to society is my reason to get out of bed despite how tired I am.
Yep.
So, yeah, like I said, it could go either way, an excuse or reason. You just got to understand in your own soul, your own heart, what's important to you, what's your belief, and what are you going to do? Lean on an excuse to avoid the hard stuff, or lean on the reason to do the hard stuff?
Good call, yeah. And I think that applies to every situation in our life, right? Like, you
100%.
just related it to getting out of bed in the morning. Like, that's a pretty simple example, but it's powerful to realize that every single decision we make, like, are we making excuses, or are we having reasons to do what we do? So
I would think, and you can read my column, I touch on this briefly, but if you're not careful, an excuse is going to be dressed up in sheep's clothing and appear to be a reason. So I think the challenge for you and I is to dig a little deeper when we're thinking of an excuse, or when we're telling ourselves not to do something because XYZ. Why is that because? Like, is it really an issue of safety or being smart? Or is it an issue of fear or a waste of time, or an issue of something a little deeper than just not doing it?
yeah.
I think I've beaten that one to death. Ultimately, like you said, the issue is really kind of digging it within yourself. Is your reason for action a reason or an excuse? And I think if you dig a little deeper as to why you're not doing something or why you are doing something, you might find a little more understanding of your motivation to either do or not do something. And that could lead to some pretty powerful breakthroughs or a little more productivity in your life.
Yep. Good stuff, dude. That's a good
I
point.
hope it's good. I'm not kidding you. We just talked for 30 some odd minutes, and I feel lost in my own head.
Well, maybe you will find the way out at some point, but at least we've introduced a topic that people can think about, and we certainly will continue thinking about. So
Yeah, well, like I said, and like you brought up, I've got a column to write, and the title is No Good Excuse. So this is an ongoing battle for me.
Yep.
So I welcome all feedback, all advice. I will find a way to work it in and stretch my own thinking when I can.
good stuff. All right, thanks, Sean. Thanks for the awesome conversation, and
you.
I'll talk to you next time.
All right, have a great day. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Find us online at twodisableddudes.com and please subscribe on the iTunes. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And special thanks to our audio producer, Jake Tompkins.
Until next time, keep living with urgency.